Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really excited to jump in with you.
So, Jon, if somebody's clicked on this video or perhaps this interview on Spotify and they don't know who you are and they are not familiar with your work, why do you think they should stick around and listen to what you have to say?
Yeah, good question. I think the game is changing, and it's changed for me certainly. I started off as a obsessed X and O, player development guy, doing a lot of workouts and a lot of coaching. And now what's happening is we're really focused on mental performance and seeing if we can make easy connections for all the athletes where they can, you know, figure things out because ultimately they don't have all the time in the world to be their best, right? Everybody's got a window, and that's what makes me so excited to work with the team I'm working with now because it's a summer league team essentially, and yeah, we got a couple months with the guys and help them make the most of it and get better.
I want to dive into your journey a little bit specifically and how that has led you to where you are today. And then I'd love to tie in the work that you do with the players and your clients because I think it's super important. And not only is it important, but I think it's something that we as fans, and I'm referring to myself here the most, we don't really realize from just watching, basketball. We're taking basketball specifically, but we don't realize from watching basketball games, right? The mental side of it, some of the struggles that the athletes might be going through. We see Steph Curry hit three after three, and we assume that everything is fine and dandy in his head, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's more of a storm brewing in there, and it's not as calm as maybe he makes it seem like on the court. So I want to definitely dive into some of those topics. But starting with your journey, I want to read you a quote that you had said. You said, "I started coaching at 14, realizing pretty early that the NBA wasn't going to call. Turns out being 5'9" with a vertical leap that barely cleared a phone book wasn't exactly a scout's dream."
Mhm.
So why? I mean, obviously you knew basketball was not going to be your long term path, but what got you into coaching?
Yeah, I kind of had a reality check. I was talking to my coach about playing university basketball, and it was just funny, like the energy. Like I know he believed in me, like he worked with me every day, but I could tell that he knew that there was more for me in coaching. He'd already seen me, just starting to work with players and camps and kind of seen me around school. And I think he saw something in me at that point. And it wasn't like he shut down playing at the next level, but it was more like, maybe there's something more out there for you. Maybe you can impact basketball in a different way. And I've had that same conversation with a lot of people that, sometimes we shy away from our talents and strengths because we're so fixated on what other people are doing or what's shiny, the shiny object syndrome of playing pro basketball or playing at the highest level because that's, those people get a lot of attention. And every human being wants to be admired. Every human being wants that kind of approval. So you have that back and forth. And when you're playing the game every single day, 24/7 from sunrise to when the sun sets, you can you can get caught in a story that you have to play. You have to keep playing. So I'm really thankful for my coach for empowering me to kind of see it a different way. It challenged me.
I imagine a lot of that has to do with our constant fight that we have with our ego and this constant validation that we need. You alluded to a little bit, but this constant validation that we need from others and from society, and maybe perhaps it's even our own expectations for ourselves. So how did you strangle with that aspect and getting past your ego?
Suffering, for sure. I think suffering accelerates your development. Working with the suffering, being with the suffering, being able to look at the stuff that's unpleasant to look at, and that kind of gives you the perspective. But generally, if you're avoiding the stuff that you don't want to look at, you kind of stay stuck in, that cycle, of chasing the validation. And I think what I'm doing now that I take a lot of pride in is I'm pretty gentle, but helping guys disrupt the pattern, and break out of it. As I said, through perspective, through zooming out, having some mobility in their mind about how they want to take something on, because there's more than one way to do this. One of my favorite examples that another sports psychologist said to me is, if you have a wall in front of you, you can try to run through that wall, but you can also go under the wall. You can go around the wall. You can jump over the wall. There's a bunch of ways to do it. But sometimes, again, it's when we're so zoomed in on something, it seems like there's only one way. And if we don't have our way, we get frustrated, we get stressed out, we tighten. And then some people shut down, or some people try to fight it and, use up all their energy and get burnt out in the process.
Why is it important that we suffer, and why do you think so many people avoid it?
Um, yeah, I think suffering is just a part of life. It's part of our human experience. It's not something that we can necessarily choose. Like you can choose more of it, and I think part of it is like going into the unknown, and that's what the ego doesn't want, right? It doesn't want to go into places that don't seem safe, that we've never been before. So this idea of going into the dark and being challenged, and continuing to have your heart and your mind open, um, takes a little bit of work. But the more that you do it, and you train your brain that everything's going to be okay when you face some fear, uh, special things happen. And how, I think for athletes, the biggest thing is we can talk about it. You can listen to me speak about it, but how we grow is through direct experience, working with the stuff. And I think in terms of avoiding, it's pain. We don't want to experience pain. We want to experience comfort, because we know we're going to be okay. So it's the resilience piece, I think, that we're missing, when athletes are stuck at good. Like I'm talented, I have these skills and these abilities, but to get to that next level, man, you got to keep putting yourself out there, and it can't just happen once in a while. It has to happen every day. 10 to 15% outside of your comfort zone is the sweet spot, and that's where we want to be. That's where we want to live as much as we can.
Couple questions. I think I'll go with this one. You just mentioned 10 to 15% outside of your comfort zone. How does one measure that?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of our athletes, it's just starting to be a little bit more intentional with their process, instead of just showing up to the gym and saying, "All right, here's another day." When you go outside of your comfort zone just for a moment, what I'm finding is, for athletes that aren't trained, we just regress right back to everything we've been doing, those cycles or patterns that we're stuck in. So when you bring some intention and you have some accountability to that intention, I think, now you're going to start to get outside of it. Now, if you're way outside of it and you feel yourself starting to shut down and break, you've probably went a little bit too far, and then we've lost this opportunity. So I think it's a feel thing, showing up every day and having a conversation with the athlete. My role is to be the guide on the side. I'm not the sage on the stage. I'm not going to try to take up, the space. I'm here to ask questions and make suggestions. So, it's working with the athlete, figuring out what it is for them. If I'm pushing too hard, as as a lot of people that are probably pretty educated listening to this podcast, you're going to be met with resistance. People are going to push back pretty hard. So meeting athletes where they are, and figuring out what works out for them, how they're getting some traction with their process, is my job. That's what I do.
You mentioned dealing with uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of those topics that I find myself going back to try and learn more about, specifically in terms of how the brain processes uncertainty, why why we deal with uncertainty in the manner that we do. A lot of people struggle with uncertainty, and I heard this quote. It wasn't really a quote, but somebody explaining how to deal with uncertainty, and they were saying, at the end of the day, your battle with uncertainty stems from the fact that you don't trust yourself in certain situations. And so if you go into a situation where things are not certain, that is basically, your mind telling you, hey, I don't trust that we can handle what's about to come. And so I've tried to work backwards from that and say, okay, anytime I'm in an uncertain situation, it's like, why do I not, like, I've done hard stuff in the past. So why do I not trust myself to handle this next obstacle or this next challenge the same way that I've handled other similar, perhaps hard things in life? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, trusting is something I've been working on quite a bit. And I think it's like the more you do it, the better you get at it. And just recognizing, like for me, it's noticing the times where I haven't went with my gut or haven't went with my heart, where I haven't acted and I've kind of held back. And it's just changing the tone. I see a lot of athletes that really struggle with the unknown, and then they kind of beat themselves up like, oh man, it was right there, it was right in front of me, I had the opportunity and I shut off to it. And I think when you reflect on it, it's being a little bit more gentle. Having it's something that's challenged by a lot of people, and I challenged it when I was younger. It's softening. Like, can I soften in this moment? And as I soften, I can figure out a way to flow. I can find a way to win. Soft doesn't mean that I quit, or you know you can penetrate me. I still have this energetic bubble. I'm protecting myself, allowing in what I need to allow in, and working with it. But I think even for me, with these athletes and being a mental performance coach, the more I've really just trusted myself and said what I had to say in the moment, you know, I've been able to connect with people at a really high level. So I think it's having a relationship that is a little bit more gentle, and it doesn't necessarily need to be forced. Because I think anytime something gets forced, um, as I said, you're met with resistance, and or you magnify the resistance. One of the parables that I really like is called the second arrow. It's a Buddhist parable, and the idea is the first arrow is, you know, the pain. Like I experienced some pain. I experienced the pain of uncertainty. The second arrow is like taking the arrow out and stabbing ourselves, in that we're refusing to be with the pain or to be with the moment. So that's how I look to approach things, is seeing things as they are, as painful as they are, and then working with it, working with the material.
You mentioned softening, and for some reason, my mind went to self talk. And the reason I went there is because I think a lot of times, a lot of people are very hard on themselves, and that self talk aspect, although we're not obviously consciously aware of it, it feels like it's always there, whether we realize it or not, perhaps even subconsciously. What's been your experience with negative self talk, and what's usually the advice that you give for someone struggling with that negative self talk?
Yeah, I think for me, it's recognizing the inner critic, because a lot of times when people really struggle with like the negative self-talk, it's that they have no separation. There's the inner critic, and then there's me. And when the inner critic starts to consume me, it's like I can't breathe. It's just on top of me. It's really heavy. It's pretty challenging to work with it. And a lot of people, I think, that struggle with or get into mental illness, let's say, they just can't get out of it. They're stuck in it. And that's why they need assistance. And even if it's not, mental illness, even just mentally unhealthy, like I'm just caught in these cycles, having a guide on the side, having somebody that you can talk to, and just or even writing it down, and seeing the words that you're saying, and you know discerning, is this really true for me? Is this really true? And so I think the first thing is having some awareness, and acknowledging it in the moment. Like if I'm, I don't know, playing in the game and I'm starting to slow down enough where I can start to hear the noise that, you suck, you're not very good, or you're never going to figure it out. I mean, if I can say out loud, this is the inner critic, the inner critic is here, fear is here, and I can soften the inner critic, over time will eventually start to quiet down. But it's when I fight it, like, oh, this isn't true, or start to get a little bit paranoid, like, oh, where's this going to take me? No, that's fear, you know. And when we're at our best, we're playing out of the love for the game. We're not playing out of fear or scarcity, or I'm not going to get enough playing time, or what is coach going to think about me when I do this? That's just all fear, And I think you're either in love or you're in fear, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how that ties into confidence. And is confidence something that, I mean, I know it, well, I guess I'll wait for your answer. Is confidence something that can be taught?
Absolutely. I think it's a skill. I think it's like anything. It's something that you work at every single day. And I think confidence can be a few things, like when I think about confidence, I think about tapping into your own physiology, and strengthening it, like being able to read and recognize stress and fear and anxiety. You can recognize that energy in the body. I think a lot of times when we feel those things, we just want to get rid of it, or we want to numb out to it. And I think the more you can just sit with it and see it, and then discharge it, let it go, move the energy, regulate, as people talk about regulating your system. As you do that, you're reinforcing who you are. Every time you go into that, you continue to reinforce that I'm a confident person. I can handle all the stuff that comes my way. And I think that's where true confidence is. A lot of people have like this surface level confidence. They're super high and super low. They're fairly unstable. And that's because they're chasing, as we talked about, they're chasing validation. I make a couple baskets, I feel really good. Coach says I'm doing a great job, I feel really good. Coach says I'm not doing a very good job. Well, I don't feel good, or I missed a couple baskets or shots or whatever. It's, people are playing that game. So you have the choice for what game you want to play. And now we have to train that game. It's something that a lot of people don't really know where to start. And that's why I'm so excited to be a person in this space on Instagram, or just working with my clients, or working with our team and helping them understand what true or permanent or core confidence really is.
You spoke about regulating when you experience some of these emotions. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so I'd say the first thing about regulation is a lot of times we want to regulate too fast, and a lot of times when we try to regulate too fast, we can get into like unhealthy coping mechanisms to regulate our system. So an example could be food. For me, I grew up on chocolate chips and waffles every single day, you know, and I was super low and I would get high, or if I was super high, I would, eat, I don't know, uh, peanut butter and toast with whatever, So sometimes we can regulate through food, or uh, sex, or alcohol and drugs, or our phones. Like when we want to regulate too fast, we're kind of impulsive. So the first thing that we want to do in terms of regulating and regulation, meaning finding your center, coming back to who you really are, this still small quiet voice within you that a lot of times gets not ignored, but it's just tough to listen to because there's so much stuff going on around us. So the first thing we need to do is, can we slow down? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sit on a meditation cushion. It could mean just going for a walk, just recognizing sensation, because a lot of people, when they experience pain, the first thing that they do is they numb out, and it's not necessarily always a choice. Some of us, probably all of us have trauma, and our bodies are numbed out. So if we can feel into some of this sensation, like, can I feel my belly, or can I bring my attention to my chest right now as I'm breathing, noticing where I'm breathing from? Man, my breath is just very shallow and really tight, and it's all up in my chest. Okay, can I just breathe just a little bit deeper? Can I feel my feet on the ground? You know, so you come back to the body, you start feeling, and then you do what you do. You do what you need to do. Whatever tool or method or practice works for you, and it's different for everybody when you get to that place of regulation. Some athletes that I work with just want to speak about it, just want to talk about it, and have me listen and hold space. And they'll talk for 30 minutes about it. Some athletes want to get into their bodies and do a lot of movement and do some breath work. So, you as you go throughout your journey, you figure out what works for you. And the more you get to know yourself, you develop this self-awareness, then you're a little bit more effective and efficient. You can bounce back or refocus fast, a little bit faster than you used to, and then you go into that place of reinforcing who you really are, from an identity place. Oh, this is who I am when I step onto the court. It doesn't matter what's happening, or if the crowd says this or coach says that or the teammates respond this way. I know who I am, and I'm just going to continue to show up to be that person, be that player.
I want to take us to George Mumford, which, for those unaware, is, well, first of all, he's in the space of mental performance. He worked with Michael Jordan, he worked with Kobe Bryant, Phil Jackson, the Bulls in the 90s, the Lakers in the 2000s. So his resume is quite extensive, and it speaks for itself. He's also written a couple of fantastic books. He was also a guest on this podcast. And I love George's work, and he is such a bright man. And if you just listen to him for 5 minutes, I guarantee you'll pick up something that's valuable, and that can add to your life in a meaningful way. And George came on the podcast, and he spoke about how, everybody sees Michael Jordan as this confident killer on the court, and nothing can ever faze him. And, people always, still to this day, they always debate, how did Michael become that? How was that an overnight thing where, one day he was like this and the next day he just became an assassin? Probably not true, right? These things take time. Was it just years of meditation, perhaps? Was it years of just honing in his mind? Like, how did he get to where he is? And George had an insight, which I often think about, and he said how Michael's greatest strength was his ability to be present during a game, and just in life in general, but especially during a game. His singular focus was, if he was dribbling the ball up the court, his singular focus was on that, on that ball and on getting it over the half court line. If he was driving to the hoop, his singular focus was, how am I going to finish above this defender? What layup package am I going to use this time around? And so just his ability to stay focused in everything he did, again, especially on the court, was his greatest strength. We spoke a little bit about regulation and about the importance of being in tune with your body and with your mind, and just, I think it all ties back to this idea of being present and being in the moment. What's your advice for someone who perhaps feels like they are not present, or they're always stuck ruminating on the past or ruminating on the future, but the present moment just keeps slipping away?
Yeah, shout out to George. He's an OG. I mean,
Yeah.
he's someone that really inspired me with his book, The Mindful Athlete. Got a few athletes that I've gifted that book to. But I think just start small, talking about George Mumford and Phil Jackson. I think Phil Jackson, he started with just 1 minute with his team. Like, can we just sit here for a minute? Put your feet on the ground, breathe in a little bit deeper, use your mudra, he'd have his hands in a certain way. And you start simple. And then from that place, you start to build. And then maybe that 1 minute practice that you're doing before practice is something that you start doing on the bench, when you sub out, or maybe in the game when someone's shooting a free throw, or the score clock's messed up, or your coach is speaking to you. Can you practice playing present? And as I said with confidence, I just believe it's a muscle. And the more we can recognize that we've went away from our center and we can come back, that's the practice. And as I said before, you don't necessarily need to be on a meditation cushion to do that. You can do it when you're walking your dogs. You can do it when you're making supper. You can do it when you're speaking to somebody. It doesn't have to be this big thing. And I think when people reach out to me, it's like they're looking for this elaborate, like very complex blueprint about how to play present. And it's just, small, simple daily doses of it. And also recognizing that it's not all the way your fault. It's our society, man. Everything is trying to pull your attention in every single direction. So we're kind of being programmed and conditioned to go away from our center. So that's why it's a daily thing, man. You got to guard your attention. This is, we're kind of in a spiritual war right now with how things are going. So that to me is what playing present's really about.
Are you familiar with George's Eye of the Hurricane?
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like that's a good metaphor for what you just explained. It's like you always, for those unfamiliar, George has this metaphor where he says you always should strive to be in the eye of the hurricane, because the eye of the hurricane is completely calm, right? Everything around it is crazy destruction, whatever, crazy winds, but in the eye of the storm, it's completely calm. And so he uses that to describe, your surroundings are almost like, the walls of the hurricane, and then you yourself are at the center of all that, where it's completely calm. You mentioned an energy, your energy bubble earlier, where you're deflecting all these things that are taking away from your energy. And so I just think the eye of the hurricane is a great metaphor for how we should strive to perhaps live our life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's as I said before, I just think it's like, what game do you want to play? You can choose to play this whatever game you want to play. And yeah, it's definitely a back and forth. You get caught on things that sometimes don't necessarily align with who you really are. So yeah, to be able to catch yourself and bounce back is the game that I want to play. That's yeah.
George has this thing too where, and we could probably do a whole podcast on just his teachings, but granted, I think this is more of a general idea, this idea of a beginner's mindset. And George describes this as, and I think actually it was a quote, it might have been a quote from Bruce Lee or somebody else, I'm forgetting, so forgive me, but essentially the quote is, a full cup can receive nothing and an empty cup can receive everything. And George says that some of the best qualities that Kobe and MJ had was their beginner's mindset. That, when George first started talking about meditation and this idea of being present, both MJ and Kobe had this mindset of, teach me everything you know. I know nothing. I want to learn as much as possible. What do you think the importance of a beginner's mindset is?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is, I think if we truly want to value the beginner's mind, it's going to be, it starts with our teachers modeling the beginner's mind. Like, are they actively going out and learning and growing? And that inspires the beginner's mind in the people that I've been around. Because if your teacher is so caught up on, I need this person to learn this, I need to push this on them, I just think it just makes it challenging for the athlete to really own it and take responsibility for what they're learning. So it's a dance. It's not, I'm the teacher, you're the student. I'm just as much of a student as you are. As we're figuring this out together, that's that's what we're doing here. And there's going to be times where you teach or you take the role of teaching, because ultimately, from what I've learned, teaching is the highest form of learning. So as the guide, I need to be the student. We go back and forth. So I think if we want to say that we value that as coaches or leaders, yeah, we need to step into that space and own it, and then we'll inspire everybody around us to do the same.
We've mentioned MJ and Kobe. I'm curious. Yeah, and I was looking through some of your old YouTube videos. You have some great YouTube videos on. I think you had one on Steve Nash that he reposted on Twitter a while back on how to effectively run a pick and roll, which Steve was just a maestro at that. Great video too, by the way. What NBA players did you look up to, or what was there any specific players that you took a lot away from, whether it was their mindset on the court, their play style, or anything that you even use today with your clients?
So when Kobe passed away, I really start to study his life. Like, I went through every single interview I could find, everything that he said, and I just wanted to see if I could, create as many lessons as I could from him, and then have it ready to share with players. Because I think, as much as you and I, or even George, I'm sure at times, can speak about how important it is with the mind, when NBA players say something, as you're implying, it just hits different. So I studied Kobe, and got to kind of see a few things like alter ego, or the transformation that he made as a leader, right? Like, recognizing when he needed to back off, because he was just constantly, always in the gym, and always doing the thing, and trying to get guys to his level, through, his work ethic, through modeling. So I think Kobe definitely was somebody that has really left a legacy for everybody. And that's probably who I, look to the most. And I'll look through those old clips, from whatever it's been, 4, 5, 6 years ago, and uh, just start having discussions with players, right? Like, hey, what do you think about this clip? What do you relate to any of this? Does this make sense for you? And I think that really starts to have, you have this open dialogue that two people come together, and that's the relationship we talked about before. Is when I've been at the pro level, as much as I came in, with all the mindfulness and all the mental performance, one of the guys that I meet I'd say almost every day, or every couple of days since the season training camp is starting here, is Mitch Creek, and I've learned so much from him. He's our captain with our professional team, and he's elevated me as a leader and empowered me to take more risk, to try things. And so I think that's the game. That's another game that we're playing. Can you listen? Can you learn? Can you stay open? Can you continue to embody this beginner's mind, even when things get a little bit challenging?
Do you enjoy taking risks?
Now I do. Yeah, now I do. I mean, I wanted to be a head coach. Like, when I was young, it was like, oh, okay, I can't be a head coach or I can't be a player in the NBA. Maybe I can be a coach. And I got to a point where I recognized, again, I was chasing the validation instead of, really chasing truth. And when I was able to, I don't know, go through the whole COVID experience, and sit with myself, and have deep conversations with people over Zoom, that kind of woke me up to like why I'm here. And why I'm here to grow. I'm here to learn. I'm here to fail, make mistakes, to learn from them. And if you're not taking risk, I think it's just not going to happen for you. It's why I've moved around the world. It's why I've coached people in every continent. It's why I stopped just with the basketball stuff and leaned into basketball mindfulness. You know, everybody growing up my hair, growing up my beard. I've had so many people, you know, talk to other people and say, "Hey, he's a little crazy." I'm like, I had to go crazy, man. I had to go crazy. I needed that perspective. I needed to break out of everything I was doing to grow and learn.
I have a quote here from Alex Ramosi, who is an entrepreneur. He's big on social media too. He says, if you risk nothing, you become nothing, you are nothing. And that stuck with me, A, because it's harsh, but I think it's true. And I think sometimes we do need to hear the harsh truth that if there is no risk in your life, then what are you truly doing? And if we always do live in this feeling of comfort, then are we truly living, or are we just living to appease some part of our mind that is telling us, "Hey, we're good here. This level of comfort that we have right now, let's just stay here for a little bit longer." And I think a lot of people struggle with this idea of risk. Um, it could be something as stupid as, oh, stupid might be the wrong word, but something as simple as asking out a girl on a date, or if a guy, if you're a girl. Um, and that seems very risky to us, just like perhaps starting a podcast may seem very risky, or becoming a coach is very risky. Like there's intrinsic risk with anything that we do. And so I really like the fact that we went onto this topic of risk, because I think a lot of people struggle with it, and a lot of people, quite frankly, avoid it in its entirety.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it goes back to just everything that we've been talking about. You know, like this idea of getting outside the comfort zone and just really showing up for yourself, right? Like we're just pulled by so many people's opinions, what we should do. Like when I was growing up, and I think this is the same story for a lot of people. It's you're kind of encouraged to take the safe choice. And what I found was there's people taking the safe choices and telling me to take the safe choice, and they were miserable. And I'm like, I just don't understand how you can be miserable and continue to push that message. But it's because that same message was pushed onto them. So one of the things that we've been doing a lot of work with to break out of that thinking is to understand what you believe. We do a lot of journaling with our athletes. I put together a journal about 6 months ago called Free Your Mind, and you can find it on Amazon if you're interested. But one of the things that we look at in the journal is something called shadow work. It was started by Carl Jung, and it's this idea that we repress a lot of our emotions, we repress a lot of who we are, and when you can just really ask some deeper questions, that's where you start to understand your thinking. And that's what I was saying before about being able to write stuff down and just evaluate or discern, is this really true for you? Is this something that you really want to continue to live this kind of way, you know, or do you want to break out of it? And what small steps can you take today to break away from it? So I just think generally in our society, and I know for me this is true in my early 20s, it's like I just didn't want to think for myself. I just wanted to just listen and be gullible and just do what everybody else was doing. But to be able to really have the discipline to sit with yourself and ask these questions, or sit with someone else and ask these questions, I think that's when you start to develop this self-awareness, and then you can start to make some choices that empower you and build you up.
What are some examples of deep questions that people can start asking themselves today?
I mean, this is a deep one, but it's the first one that came to mind is when was the first time that you experienced heartbreak? When was that? What was that like? What did you feel in your body? Like that could be something. Have you experienced that same heartbreak again? Has that led to you avoiding experiences? Um, what energizes you? Or what depletes your energy? Um, what are things that strategically you want to avoid that don't really make sense for who you are? Uh, yeah, I think those are some good places to start. Things that bring you happiness. What are the small things every day that you really enjoy that help you play present or help you be present with your family or your friends or whomever? Uh, yeah, so I think those are things, and I got a bunch of those kind of questions in the journal. Um, but showing up every day and doing 5 minutes or 10 minutes is shown a lot of significant change with people. And I'm not just saying that. That's like 30, 40 years of research with emotions and how the brain works and how we wear these lenses. Whatever your core beliefs are, I'm looking out into the world, and that's going to I'm going to look for evidence for the things that I believe and continue to reinforce and stay in this mental loop.
We'll be sure to include the link to the journal in the description of this podcast. So if you're interested, please check out the link in the description. I might have to go pick up a copy myself because I recently have gotten really into meditation and into journaling, and I would love to have more questions that I could ask myself. And you know what the my biggest takeaway from just going down this journey of meditation recently and trying to be more present is realizing how not present I was before and how distracted we constantly are. You alluded to it before, with so many things vying for our attention nowadays, where I realized I was like, do I even think for myself at any point during the day, or do I just go on my phone and Twitter tells me, hey, you should be mad at, Steph Curry because he missed 10 threes tonight. Simple example. There's obviously examples that are a lot more perhaps devastating, but or am I getting texts from my friends saying, hey, you should, think about this in this manner, or you should be mad because person so and so did this. It's like, wait, so what do I actually think? Like what are my, to your point about core beliefs, like what are my core beliefs? Like how should I respond to this situation? And it's just like we're constantly on autopilot. And especially for people who perhaps work a 9 to 5 or a steady job, like you are just going through the same routine day in and day out. And so just taking a step back from all that and saying, all right, what, like, am I happy? To your point, am I happy? I heard the advice of taking a calendar and writing down, this is what gave me energy today. Or if there's a day in particular that you felt super happy or very energized, color coding that on the calendar and writing down what made you so energized. Just simple things like that. It's really night and day. And then you start realizing all the good in your life, hopefully, and you start realizing all the bad and how you can maybe deal with the bad. And it's I highly recommend it. Just taking, and to your point, you don't have to do this whole fancy routine. It could just be taking 5 minutes, sitting down in your favorite chair, and just letting your thoughts run through your mind. Not trying to force any specific thought, just whatever comes to mind in this specific moment. Like that's what it's gonna be. And I'm gonna, to your point, I'm gonna feel my toes. I'm gonna feel my, my surroundings, and yeah, it's been a game changer for me. So I definitely, can't, state the importance of it enough.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll make clear too, or at least something that I believe, is that I don't think happiness is outside of you. Happiness is
Mm.
something that's within you. And it's the same thing with greatness. Like when I work with these athletes, it's like, oh yeah, I want to be great someday. It's like you're already great. You're inherently worthy. It's already within you. And the more that you do this work, you're just going to be able to bring that out. You're bringing it out. You have happiness, sadness, joy, depression, anxiety. It's always there. You can feel that, all of that stuff right now. But it's the work. It's training the brain to make it more accessible to you, and realizing that the hard lesson is, no matter, and this is as cliche as it gets, and you've heard this message a million times, and I'll say it, one more time, is that, it's not going to be the money. It's not going to be, the status. It's not going to be any of that stuff, because like, if you can't be happy right now in this moment, you're never going to be happy, you know? And being able to slow down and find that presence. It's always there. It's always available to you. You have all these intrinsic tools. That's what I get really excited about. Yeah.
I have a quote here from Buddha that I wrote down that relates to what you just said. The quote is, "Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are."
Mhm.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll push back on the Buddha here. I think
Let's do it.
well, I think one of the books that everybody's talked about, I think in this space, is A Man's Search for Meaning by
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I took away from that book was that there needs to be some kind of tension. And I don't know if the Buddha's saying that there isn't supposed to be any tension, but like, for me and the athletes, like, I know for me personally, if I don't have any tension, man, I go off the rails. Like, I you know, I need some purpose. I need something that's pushing me forward. I need to feel some pressure. I need to know that this is bigger than me. I think that's like one of the most spiritual things, is your connection to everybody around you, and that there's a ripple effect on everything that you do. So I need to show up every day. I need to show up for myself so I can show up for other people. That It's important to have tension, but if there's too much tension, yeah, I think you get rigid. You start to, really get burnt out. And now I have no ability to, you know, be sustainable with my mission. So there are moments where we need to experience deep relaxation. And for a lot of people, I know for me, 100%, and I'm sure for you, just with your podcast and all the good work that you've been doing, Nick, I think we just fight relaxation. We fight it because we're always told that, you got to be working, you got to be doing something. So I think elite athletes, the next thing for you after you develop this elite focus is also the recovery aspect. Can you slow down and, just as we've been talking about again and again, can you find presence? Can you really find it and then enjoy it and sit with it and notice subtle changes happening through, your mind and your brain, noticing your heartbeat slowing down. And everybody wants to be on the go. I'm always feeling like I have to do something or be something, but you already are everything you need to be.
I'll be candid. I say used to because we're actively working on it, but
Uh,
I used to have a terrible relationship with relaxation. And it got to a point last year where anytime I would, set aside some amount of time to relax, I would feel bad. And a perfect example, like, I obviously love watching sports. Anytime I'd sit down to watch a basketball game or football game, there'd be that little voice in the back of my head that would always be, telling me, "What are you doing? You're wasting time. Why are you not working on the podcast? You could be editing clips right now. You could be emailing, cold emailing guests, reaching out to people on Instagram." And it was constant. Like, it was always there. Like, I always noticed it, but I never thought much of it, if that makes sense. Like, I never thought that there was something wrong with that. I just thought that that's who I was, and that was normal. So it got to a point where I would bring my laptop with me downstairs, and anytime I'd be watching an NBA game, I'd be working or I'd be doing something because that little voice was taking over and saying, all right, if you want to relax, guess what? You're also going to have to work. So yeah, it was unhealthy, and it did lead to burnout. Like I felt extremely burnt out at the end of last year, extremely burnt out.
And Nick, can I ask you a question that kind of puts
Absolutely.
you on the spot a little bit? Where do you think that came from? Like, if you look at your personal history, where was that story or that narrative that I always need to be working, or I can't take it easy? Where does that stem from?
I think honestly, it stems from this idea that I'm never enough, and this idea that people are going to view me differently if I don't succeed to some level or to some degree. Like everything that I've done up to this point has not been enough to satisfy these imaginary needs that other people have that are not even truly real, right? Nor has anybody told me, hey, Nick, you need to be better. Or it's just this idea that I almost fabricate. And I'm sure maybe it started from an early age. That's perhaps part of the journey that I've yet to go down is tracing it all the way back to my early years. And I've read online that just from studying other people, that all it takes is one comment, especially when you're young, to plant that seed. And so it's just this idea that I'm never enough, and that no matter what I do, I cannot please these imaginary needs.
Yeah. So let's, if you're open, let's do some work for just a
Let's do
moment.
it. Yeah, this is fantastic. Doing work on the Victory Degree podcast. Let's do it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do a lot is we'll do fill in the blanks, and for me, it's very intuitive, and it just helps you start to understand yourself, right, and what you believe. So, like the first one I'd ask you, or I'd say out loud, is I feel most worthy when.
It's a good one. I think when I receive external validation. So whether that is a comment from a friend or from a parent, that's, either it's, hey, great job, or hey, I've listened to the podcast recently, great interview with John. Hey, I've seen that you've been killing it with your clips. They're really doing well on Instagram. Any sort of external validation, I think is when I feel most worthy.
And I feel most unworthy when.
I guess the flip side of that, when I don't receive any external validation, when I feel like my efforts go unnoticed. Trying to think when else. When else do I feel really unworthy? I'd say that's probably the main one. Or if I feel like I've let somebody down in any sort of way, whether that's not coming through on a promise or, again, not satisfying some imaginary need, I feel like I feel pretty unworthy.
When I feel unworthy, I feel in my body.
Like physical sensations.
Yeah.
I have struggled. Struggled might be too strong a word. I've had anxiety in the past. I feel. I guess I'm trying to think physically.
Yeah.
Just down. I guess almost like, kind of the feeling that you have when you're sick, just kind of tired, and almost numb to a degree.
Numbness.
Yeah.
Do you feel a weight?
I do actually. Now that you mention that, yeah, I do feel like there's a weight on my shoulders, that I need to And I think that's what kind of starts the spiraling, right? Is like I feel unworthy. I feel like there's a weight on my shoulders, and then I almost feel like I need to do double the amount of work to get that weight lifted off my shoulders to then get back to some baseline.
Yeah. So see just for a moment if you can adjust your posture and put your shoulders back and open
Mm.
just a little bit more, and then feel your feet on the ground and see if you can just soften through your belly.
Yeah, I feel a lot calmer.
And and notice your heartbeat. Start to sense it. Is it beating a little bit more fast? Noticing that sometimes when you breathe in and you start to extend your exhale, how your heartbeat will slow down. Just give it some time.
Yeah, that feels good.
Noticing where you're breathing from. So are you breathing now more through your chest, or has there been a change? Maybe you're breathing a little bit deeper, a little bit more open, a little bit more free. Maybe there's a little bit more flow and smoothness. Sometimes our breath can get a little bit rigid and sticky. So it's cool, like for you to be on here, like on your own show, and being vulnerable and being able to speak on these things. And then you go into some of that tension, some of the things that are tough to talk about. A lot of people have like a vulnerability hangover, like, oh, did I share too much? What did I just say?
Mm.
Was that too much? You get caught in that loop, and it feels uncomfortable, and there's tension. And that's what we're speaking about. But tension is where you're starting to break through. Like if you think about birth, when a child is born, is that painful? Man, that's so painful. That's one of the most painful things you can experience as a human. And I don't know, because I'm not a woman and I haven't had kids in that way, but it's uncomfortable. And so for you to get outside of your comfort zone, share those things, and then now rebound. And now what we're doing is we're softening. So now you can soften, you can relax, you can recover. Heart rate has descended, and now you go back into it. So one of the things that we haven't talked about has been, what I do, and how I help pro players. And one of the things that I've been doing with our athletes is something called pendulation. And that's the process that I just communicated to you now. I put them in a workout and I put them in situations that I know trigger them. So, for example, we had an athlete last year. We played 20 games on the season. We won 14 games out of the 20. And 6 games that we lost, 4 of the games he was ejected. And when he was ejected, one of the things that was happening was he would run to the rim at a transition, and they would wrap him up, both arms. Uh, they'd call him, I'm not going to say it out loud, but they'd call him different curse words and all this stuff. And he would take his hands and just shove them and push them and try to get him off. It was really uncomfortable. He would get really tight. He'd get put into fight or flight. He'd get too high. And so with these workouts is I'd work with him and I'd wrap him up and teach him, okay, can I, instead of pushing my hands out, can I take my hands and put them up and surrender to the feeling and breathe a little bit deeper? And then eventually maybe swim, and get some separation and then seal deep at the charge circle. So after we go through that of him feeling uncomfortable, I'm then helping him soften and teaching him and teaching his brain that I can experience fear. I can experience uncertainty and I can be okay with it. I know I can do this. That's where resilience is developed. But we need to go into those areas of tension. We need to go into the sympathetic nervous system, really be activated, feel it, and then eventually soften, and then go back into it, and then soften. Athletes that get stuck and see me, especially when they're in shooting slumps, is they're in the sympathetic and they can't get out of it. They can't relax. They're holding on. So I need to learn to discharge. I've had athletes that I start talking and, we start to slow things down and they burst into tears. because they've been holding stuff and they haven't had a space where they could share it and really move the energy. Or I've had athletes shake and tremble, like their bodies are actually shaking and trembling when we're talking about things. But that's the body discharging the energy that you've been holding on to. The stuff, that energy is stored in our tissues, and people call that trauma. So I'm sure for some of these players that are in these fight or flight states and have outbursts or shut down, a lot of that's just trauma, stuff that they experienced from years ago that they haven't been able to fully process and make sense of. So that's also part of the work that we haven't really talked about, but is there for people to start to understand. I see it in our athletes a lot of times when they're getting sped up and they're getting, away from their center. I'd say most times, if not all the time, you can retrace it back to their personal history. A coach said, like you said, it just was one incident. I had one player I worked with. He was going to NBA workouts, and he told me he didn't make the NBA, but he went to all these NBA workouts as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, and he ended up going back to Europe. And the coach, I don't know, I'm not sure, the coach, he maybe didn't think he was good enough or didn't think he deserved it or whatever. And this player, the coach went up to the player and would shake him and grab him by the jersey and tell him that he wasn't good enough. And man, that lasted for most of his pro career, for like 6 years of feeling that tension and then believing that he wasn't good enough. And then so he'd hold back, he'd freeze up. And we went through that process of being able to let go of that and heal and feel that he's full, or that he's whole and that he's enough. So that's the journey for us all, to be able to, as I've said a few times, look at the stuff that's difficult to look at, stuff that's difficult to talk about, feeling psychologically safe, trusting someone that they're not going to judge you or, reinforce the messaging that you were told when you were younger. Yeah.
It's deep stuff, John. Real deep. And I can tell you that even the exercise that we went through has helped me a ton. And I think it just reinforces everything we've discussed today. And it reinforces the fact that we all need to take some time to slow down and to ask ourselves some of these tough questions. Because, listen, we all have trauma. We all have certain stuff that we've gone through. And I think a lot of people, myself included, for a very long time, try to push away those feelings, because they can seem daunting and they can seem very scary. So I think just being able, I was trying to pull up a tweet. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Magnus and some of the work that he does, also in the kind of mental human performance realm. He had this really great thread that if I find, I'll put in the description of this episode, where he talks about just fear, anxiety, all these emotions that we go through on a daily basis. And he said the first step in all of this is realizing that you're experiencing it. Mm-hmm. That when you are experiencing fear, being able to label it as fear and not as some crazy alternative. And we brought up anxiety, and I think a lot of people, even with anxiety, it seems a lot more daunting in your own mind, and it seems like this big, scary dragon that's coming to attack you. But I think just reframing it and understanding, all right, I'm feeling anxious in this moment. Why am I anxious? Understand that, there's something happening either in my mind or whatever. Maybe it was a past experience that's making me feel this way. So how do I push past that? And how do I learn to live with it? That alone has helped me a ton, because before I would label anxiety as just something that was out of my control, something that would just pop up out of nowhere. And I never knew when it would come up again. But then I started to see a pattern and started to realize that in specific scenarios, in specific situations, it would start to come up, and it was a cycle and it would repeat. And then I'll tell myself, all right, you are in control. Like you you can choose to label it as something that is terrible and something that is this big scary thing, or you can choose to label it as a normal human emotion that you just have to work through, and that there's some root cause that you are not yet understanding, but perhaps with meditation, some of the techniques that we've talked about today, some of these deeper questions, perhaps you will get to that root cause one day. So just that simple reframing has helped me a ton.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Nick, and I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Is I'm feeling a certain way and it feels really uncomfortable, so this is bad.
Hmm.
And when you shift and you reframe it and say, okay, this is uncomfortable, but these are just signals. This is just my heart rate beating really fast, or my body's starting to tighten up. That is, that's where you become, I think, a mature athlete or a mature person that can really be intimate with feelings, sensations, emotions. And the more you do that, like the more that like you go through this process that you just described, man, that's where uh, you take your power back. And it's amazing to me when I think about myself as a teenager, how numbed out I was to my body. Like I didn't recognize these sensations or the anxiety or whatever else. And now I'm just so sensitive to it. I'm so sensitive to it that I can actually feel it in other people. And what I've noticed is the more I can feel it, but specifically feel my own body as I'm experiencing the connection and or the conversation, I can really help somebody. But if I'm numbed out to my body and I'm just all heady, that's when I get into a lot of times the fix it mode. Oh, you're suffering, you're feeling really down and out. How can I change this? How can I relieve the suffering? How can I bring you out of this? Instead of saying, hey, this is something that they're going through and they may have to go through this for I don't know how long, you know, but I have to sit with it and I have to be with them. And a lot of times when they feel that energy coming from me, they can start to relax. That's called co-regulation, and that's as simple as sometimes just going up to a guy in practice and giving him a high five. You can co-regulate just by giving a high five, or by saying, "Hey, how was the weekend?" and feeling like you're in your center when you ask that question, feeling your feet on the ground, and then no matter how heavy it's been for that person, they can start to rebound and then come back to their center. And then that energy is contagious, and then we're all co-regulating, we're all elevating and being in the present moment. One of the things Phil Jackson said, uh, what was it? I'm going to butcher it. It was like one team, one breath, or one breath, one team. Like we're all breathing, at the same pace. We're all connected. This guy can't be over here and this guy's down here. No, we're all doing this together. Um, but it's those micro interactions that really bring us together and where we feel as one. We're one team.
Couple questions to round us out here, John.
Ah,
Why do you think there is such a negative stigma, I guess would be the word for it, around mental health, especially within sports and within basketball? And perhaps there's negative stigma, but also just a lack of awareness. And again, I go back to the average NBA fan, taking basketball as an example. Even when I sometimes watch games now, I never think about really what an athlete might be going through mentally. It's just very surface level. Oh, he missed a shot, or he seemed like he wasn't focused in this specific scenario. But there's so much more to it, and I feel like there's just a lack of awareness. And then when there is awareness, there seems to be within society, at least from what I've seen, just this negative stigma around it. Why? First of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, if you do, why do you think that is?
there's definitely a negative stigma with it. Like I can feel it when I walk into the room, especially when people call me he's the director of mental performance, and I can feel them shift a little bit. Um, from two aspects. The first aspect is, Nick, what you were talking about before. So you were saying how, you felt like you weren't enough. And pretty much everybody on planet Earth feels that at some point in their life. And when you start having conversations with people like myself, I might poke the bear a little bit. And if you are vulnerable and say, hey, you know what, I just feel like I'm not enough, a lot of these athletes may feel like they're going to get exposed. Oh, now, I knew I wasn't enough, but now all the people around me know that I'm not enough. And so now I'm weak. And now that I'm weak, you know, they can attack me. They're going to even come harder at me. So the idea is, uh, it's building trust with somebody that you can speak to and just putting it on the table. So I think it starts with every individual. And from that place, we can start to see the change, that it's cool to be vulnerable. And it's not only cool, but vulnerability is for the victorious. So you see people, the DeMar DeRozans and the Kevin Loves that have talked about, mental health. And I think that's definitely moving us along. This probably doesn't sound right, but I'm going to say it out loud and see if it makes sense. Uh, I think we've made it a bigger thing than it is, in a kind of a weird way. Like to me, it's very simple. Um, it doesn't have, as I've said a few times, it doesn't have to be this big thing. It can be very simple in terms of just checking in and say, hey, have things been smoother? Have things been easier for you? And from that place, we start to, I think, disarm people. Like we meet them where they're at. It doesn't have to be, you know, like today I pushed you and we got right into, okay, your personal history. Uh, you know, that to me is more of an intuition thing. Having the conversation with an athlete, and if he's ready, and some athletes open up right away, and there is no stigma, there is no negative viewpoint on the mental performance. And then some athletes, it takes a little bit more time. But I think it's just continuing to model the behavior, continue to have people that can speak about it, talk about it, and then I think we just keep taking steps with it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just see it more from, when we talk about stigma, I see that more from some of our players, at the highest levels, because we have to wear this armor. And that's why we think, like, as you said before, Nick, like Michael Jordan seems like he's not human. He can just do whatever he wants at any given time. And he doesn't have insecurity. It just doesn't exist in him. And it does. I know it does because I've been around so many different humans and so many different high level players. But he works with it. He works with the material.
I have a thought, which may be radical, but bear with me. And I've been thinking about this a lot. So one topic where I feel like this is extremely prevalent is within the health industry. And I think there is I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but I don't even know what the word. We take certain topics, and because we live in a capitalistic society, and because people want to make money, which is great, in order to be able to sell products and to sell whatever they're selling, they need to make it this big, complicated thing that needs to be solved, and they are the only ones that have the formula to solve it. And so, when I think about health and when I think about some of the people who are speaking out against all this complication that has arisen, I think about the basics. Get daily sun, get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, drink enough water, eat whole food. You do, and exercise, right? Some form of exercise. You do those things, you will be healthier than whatever, 95% of the population. But it's gotten to a point where it's like, no, that's not enough. You also now need to cold plunge every single day. And then on top of that, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And here's my 10-step formula that you can buy for 10.99 on my website that will give you the secrets to a healthy life. And so I don't know if mental health is there yet, but I do see it trending in that direction, to your point, where it's, oh, you have anxiety. Here is my 30-page PDF book on how to deal with anxiety and all the different things you need to do. And that's why I love your point of sometimes it's just very simple and it doesn't need to be this big complicated thing.
Yeah, Nick, I don't think I can say it any better than that. I think that's really where we're at is I like where we're going in terms of valuing, like more people are opening up and speaking about it and having the conversation, but it's yeah, it's just becoming more complicated. We just as humans, we're in our analytical brains, and it must be like one of the beliefs I had to break down with money, especially, was that it's really difficult and it's really hard. So I'm telling myself that constantly. And now, instead of doing simple things, like people are saying, hey, bro, you just have to do this. I can't, and I wouldn't say this consciously. It was more like of a subconscious thing. It can't be that simple. It can't be that simple. But man, it can be really simple. And the key is, as cliche as this is, it's just the consistency. Like, can you do this meditation, this very simple meditation, for 30 days, 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day? And then at that point, we can judge it, whether it's helping or not helping or where you feel. But the problem is most people aren't patient. So they, want to judge it really fast. Like it's even like I'll assign homework for athletes and they'll be like, or they'll have their game and immediately after the game, they're judging it. And I say, we just don't have enough data yet. Like our sample size is too small to really make sense of this at this point. So I think we need to be a little bit more patient and we need to stay with it. And then we can change course. But as you said, Nick, I think you go on Instagram and you just there's so many different things being thrown at you. And that just goes back to attention, right? We haven't trained our attention. Our attention is getting worse every year with, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So that's what goes back to my last point, or one of my points, is that it's a little bit of a war, man. You got to guard your attention.
We'll conclude here, but I don't know if you're familiar with the midwit meme. I think it originally sprouted on Twitter. But basically the meme is there are three people across various parts of the intelligence curve, which is a bell curve. And so, the person all the way to the left is supposed to be really dumb. The person in the middle is of average intelligence. And then the person all the way to the right is super smart. And we'll take, I know we're both active on Instagram, so we'll take growing on Instagram as an example. But, the person all the way to the left will say, well, just post the content that you yourself would want to watch and you'll grow. The person in the middle of average intelligence will say, well, you need to post at exactly this time. Your clip needs to have a 2-second intro followed by a 5-second blah, 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 right? Basically overcomplicating the whole thing. And then the person on the right, who is of superior intelligence, will say the same thing as the person who is supposedly stupid. And he will say, post the content that you yourself would want to watch. And I take that meme and apply it to basically every aspect of my life. And it may sound stupid, but it helps me, to your point, with money, right? It's like, hey, the really dumb person would say, well, John, just, do this and you'll make money. And then the person in the middle will say, well, John, you need to create a 5-day course and you need to do this and you need to market and you need to run ads, you need to do all this. And I just take that and apply it to everything I do in my life. It's like health, success, podcast, and I don't know. It's almost hilarious to say that a meme has changed my life, but that meme has truly changed my life.
Yeah, that's it's a it, that mental framework too. It's like how you see and perceive the world, how you take things on. You have some salt. That's a really solid one to think about. I like those visual examples, like where you can see it in your mind and be like, all right, like where am I on this thing? Am I more in the middle? Am I more on the left? Am I more on the right? And that goes back to, I think, the beginner's mind, right? Like if you, as you start to become an expert, sometimes, or you start to read all these books and look to make sense of things, you can kind of fall into the category of overcomplicating. So yeah, that's a really good point, Nick. I appreciate that. It's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send you I'll send you an just so you maybe have the visual representation. I'll send you an example of the meme. I'll find it on Twitter. But um, John, well, listen, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you enough for your time today. This has been, and I'm not just saying this. This has been one of my favorite podcasts I've done to date. And it's not just because we got vulnerable and we started talking about some of my issues, but your expertise in the area is very apparent, and I just love the way that you go about life and everything that you're doing. I do have to ask you one more question though, and this is a question that I've been thinking a lot about recently as I go through my own journey. And the question is, what do you wish more people knew about the price of success?
Price of success. Hmm.
And perhaps while you're thinking, let me just say this: a topic that we got into today was this idea of more, always striving for more, always doing more. I opened up and I said how I had trouble relaxing and getting my mind off of the podcast and just enjoying the finer things in life. As Nikola Jokic destroying the Thunder, but um, that is the society, especially in America, right? That's kind of how we grow, especially here. That's how we grow up. Canada as well, very similar. And I had Steve Magnus on the podcast, and he spoke about how at when you're very early into your own perhaps um, journey to becoming an athlete. Maybe you're 5 years old and you're playing soccer. It's always a comparison, and it's always, well, you're not as good as Johnny, but you're better than Matt, and you and Tony are on about the same level. And so I feel like we're always taught this game of comparison from very early on, and that kind of trickles into our adulthood, and perhaps maybe that feeds into why we never feel enough, and kind of leads us down that path. But success is almost something that is worshipped, especially here, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. I call it entrepreneurship porn, but that's in a way that's what it is. It's like, hey, working long hours is great. Ignoring all of the responsibilities in your life is great. Ignoring your relationships is great, and it's all great because it's all going to be worth it because you're going to be successful. And so
Mm.
that's why I've been thinking about this question a lot, because I think a lot of people want success, but they don't perhaps understand what it costs to get there.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's a challenge that we talked about that you brought up with the meme. I think is taking action. Like I
Mm.
think you just need to continue to take action. And there's one main variable that I really like, a mental framework that I think about a lot is the one variable that I think we need to focus more of our attention on is speed, right? Is this a moment where I need to slow down? Or is this a moment where I know exactly what I need to do? Or I may not know what I need to do, but I know I will know what I need to do after I take this action, after I take these steps. I think a lot of times I've just learned things from doing. Like the more I trust my intuition, it just gets easier. Like the more I post content on Instagram, it doesn't take me 2 or 3 days to figure the next post out. It comes to me in a matter of moments when I wake up in the morning because I've trained my brain to do it that way. So I think you just need to keep going for it and keep taking the action that's necessary. And then if you're doing too much, if you're feeling overwhelmed, what we say to our pro players all the time is cool off the gun. Can you cool off the gun? Can you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, slow it down, and then come back to it instead of banging your head up against the wall and thinking that's going to be the way. So that's something I focus on is speed. Slow down or speed up.
Love it. Jon, this has been fantastic. Again, can't thank you enough for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation. Before we log off, where can people find you and more of your work?
Yeah, the best place to find me is going to be on Instagram. So my Instagram is playfree
Love it. We'll put that in the description. Jon, thanks again for your time. Again, wishing you all the best, man.
Thanks, Nick.